is Buddhism. We're going to focus on the major teachings of this religion. So in your textbook, if you'd like to find out more, you can look at Chapter 12, Section 4, which starts on page 398. The information I'm going to present here is a simplified version of what you would find in your textbook. This week's assignment requires you to read a passage related to Buddhism. Your passage has been assigned to you on the portal, and then you are to answer the comprehension questions that go with it. Please make sure that you follow the instructions when answering the questions. Additionally, your assignment is due on Friday by 4 o'clock. We will have our live session this week, Friday at 9 a.m. So you can ask questions about your assignment, and then you will have a little bit of review time with me during the live session, as well as a short quiz on what we have been learning. And then you'll have the rest of the day to work on your stuff. All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. Again, our focus is going to be on the main teachings of the religion of Buddhism. So Buddhism, like Hinduism, started in ancient India. Buddhism is a religion based on the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama. It says here, he was a prince who gave up his wealth and position to try to understand the meaning of life. Later, when he began to teach what he had learned, he was called the Buddha, or the Enlightened One. And here you can see an image of a carving of Buddha. In this case, he is sleeping. There are many representations of Buddha. You can take a look at some in your book. I'm sure you've actually seen some because these are very common images. But on page 398, there is a depiction. There is also some on page 400 in your book. And then during our live session, we're actually going to take a look at a couple of other ones. So let's go ahead and learn a little bit more about Siddhartha Gautama and his teachings. All right. So Siddhartha was born a Hindu prince. A priest had predicted that he would become a wandering holy man. To prevent this, Siddhartha's father gave his son every luxury and sheltered him. Siddhartha did not see old age, illness, death, or poverty until he was 29. When he finally did see such troubles, they upset him. He fled his home to search for peace in a world of suffering. So according to the story of his life, which, by the way, according to your textbook, we don't know very much about. We take most of his story from Buddhist texts. But anyway, Siddhartha Gautama was a prince, probably born in what we now call Nepal. But as a prince, he was very wealthy, and he lived a very sheltered life. His parents kind of kept him behind the palace walls, so he didn't know that people got sick. He didn't realize that people got old. He didn't know that people lived in poverty or were very poor. He kind of thought everyone had the same life that he had because he was raised in such a sheltered existence. So when he finally did see these things in the world, he became very upset, and he decided to leave the palace, and he wanted to really see, well, what is true about life? Why do people suffer? He wanted to answer kind of those big questions. So it says here, for 6 years, Siddhartha starved himself, but this sacrifice did not help him find the answers he sought. Then he sat under a fig tree and meditated until he found understanding. This gave him insights into reality, which he called the Four Noble Truths. So let's talk a little bit about this word meditated. It is a vocabulary word in your textbook. The word meditate means to calm or clear the mind, often by focusing on a single object. So the fig tree that he sat under, and here in this illustration on this page, you can see the tree, and you can see him sitting under the tree with the kind of halo around his head to kind of symbolize that he has become enlightened. He now understands life. But this tree became known as the Bodhi tree, or the tree of knowledge. And according to legend, he sat under the tree for 49 days and nights and meditated and just focused on trying to understand the truths that he wanted to reach, the understanding that he wanted to reach. So at some point, he reached an awareness that freed him from earthly understandings. and existence. And they say at that point he achieved something called enlightenment. Enlightenment is also another vocabulary word. It means a state of perfect wisdom. So at that point, Siddhartha became known as the Buddha, or the enlightened one. So according to this time, he has now freed himself from the world's suffering and has reached a new understanding about life. And then according to Buddhist texts, he went back into the world to teach other people what he learned. And so for 45 years, he spent time teaching others and training others to be teachers and religious leaders of this new way. And then according to legend, he died at around age 80. So let's talk a little bit about these understandings that he came to achieve. He called these things the Four Noble Truths. So these Four Noble Truths are what Buddha discovered as a way to understand and overcome suffering. So here are the Four Noble Truths. Your textbook also has a lovely graphic organizer for you on page 401, which I think kind of makes the Four Noble Truths easier to understand. But I'm going to look at both what your textbook says and this short article so we can look at it in two different ways. So it says, 1, people suffer because their minds are not at ease. So your textbook phrases that as all of life involves suffering. So Siddhartha came to that understanding under the tree there. 2, that condition, meaning suffering, comes from wanting what one does not have or from wanting life to be different. Your textbook expresses that as suffering is caused by selfish desires. 3, people can stop suffering by not wanting. Your textbook says that in a different way. They say the way to end suffering is to overcome selfish desires. 4, people can stop wanting by following the Eightfold Path. And then your textbook says the way to overcome selfish desires is to follow the Eightfold Path, which we're going to look at here in just a moment. So it says here, the Eightfold Path involved having the right opinions, desires, speech, actions, job, effort, concentration, and meditation. This path, the Buddha taught, could lead to nirvana, or the end of suffering. Reaching nirvana broke the cycle of reincarnation that Buddhists, as well as Hindus, believed in. So for Buddhists, they believe some of the same things that we looked at with Hinduism. So both Hindus and Buddhists believe in reincarnation, the idea that your soul is born into another body. So for Buddhists, that cycle ends when you reach something called enlightenment, which then leads to nirvana. So it says here, the Buddha believed in the practice of ahimsa, but he didn't worship Hindu deities. Deities, remember, are gods. He also rejected the idea that people in the upper caste were holier than others. So here we have, again, some similarities and differences between Hindus and Buddhists. Buddhists believe in ahimsa, which is the idea that you are not going to bring harm to any living thing. Buddhists do not worship Hindu gods, and they do not believe that people in upper castes are holier than those in the lower castes. All right, so we mentioned the Eightfold Path. We need to take a closer look at that, and your textbook actually, again, has a great graphic organizer with it all in one place for us, which is on page 402 in this chart. So these are the steps of the Eightfold Path here. And then the second column here kind of explains to you how it would look. So a practical application for Buddhists. So the first 2 steps, they kind of break it into 3 parts here. The first 2 steps involve preparing one's mind for a new way of life. So 1, right belief, understanding, and believing in the Four Noble Truths. 2 is called right purpose. It is to make spiritual growth the purpose of your life. And then for the next 3 steps involve taking charge of your behavior. So 3 is right speech. This is being aware of what you're saying, meaning don't lie, use kind words, be aware of how your words affect others. 4 is right conduct. Again, understanding your own behavior and working to improve it. So making sure that your actions are appropriate. So, don't lie, don't steal, don't hurt others. 5 is right livelihood. And this involves choosing a job or profession that supports your spiritual growth. And for Buddhists, it's very important that however you earn your living, you don't want to do something that would harm other living things. And then the last 3 steps help to train your mind to gain enlightenment. So right effort has to do with trying to control your mind and really holding on to good thoughts and trying to avoid bad thoughts. 7 is right mindfulness. This is being more aware of what you think and what you feel. So you're able to control your emotions. Your emotions don't control you. And then 8 is right meditation. And this is where you are trying to learn to practice the kind of meditation that can lead to enlightenment. And your textbook says, this one is kind of, I think, the most difficult, in my opinion, to explain. So I'm just going to use the words in your book. It says, Buddhists say that those who complete this step often feel as if they have awakened from a dream to experience a new reality. So kind of going back to how the Eightfold Path relates to the Four Noble Truths is that step 4 there, the way to overcome selfish desires is to follow the Eightfold Path. So the way that you would overcome your own selfish sort of existence, according to Buddhism, is to follow these 8 things. And then once you reach all of that, your final goal would be to achieve nirvana. So the last thing I want to take a look at is just a little comparison between Hinduism and Buddhism. And you can see this on page 403. So you can see here this chart. Both religions believe in karma, reincarnation, both use meditation. Our differences, just to review with Hinduism, remember, in Hinduism, there are many gods, hundreds of gods, but they are all forms of Brahman. Their final goal is to reach moksha, which is a state of joy when you are no longer going through the steps of reincarnation. You are just one with Brahman. And then Hinduism stresses the goals of following one's duty, dharma, and living a moral life as a way to work towards moksha. When we look at Buddhism, Buddhism is based on the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama. Buddha, by the way, is not a god, so I think that's important here, and they put that here for you to know. And Buddhists don't believe in any god. The goal is to reach nirvana, a state of blissful peace, when one sees that one's self is an illusion and it ceases to exist, so you're no longer going through reincarnation. And then to do that, Buddhism stresses giving up selfish desires and following the moral teachings of the Eightfold Path to achieve nirvana. So I know this can seem very complicated if you're not familiar with it, but I think reading the article that you have assigned to you will help to make some of this a little bit more clear. And then we will also talk about it during our live session. You are also free to email me all week, of course, like always, any questions that you might have. So your next task would be to dive into your article and make sure that you follow those directions and answer all of your questions. And then, like I say, Friday at 9 o'clock is our live session, so we'll go over any questions that you have. All right, have a great day.